Well, hi you guys. Thanks for coming back to the channel. Well, we are going to do some major tradition trashing today. We have a big lesson. I'm hoping I can get it all in just these 20 minutes. So today we're going to talk about the raptured child and the dragon. So let me set up the scene for you. Revelation chapter 11 and chapter 12 overlap each other. Chapter 11 is telling us about what is going on in Jerusalem, and chapter 12 is telling us what is going on in the wilderness at the same time once the two witnesses are killed by the beast. The Bible tells us that the two witnesses will prophesy for 1260 days and then be killed by the beast. Now we know Satan is reading the Bible. He and all of his minions, they understand a lot of Bible prophecy, more than we give them credit for. So they know what's going to happen in the book of Revelation, and they're going to try and stop the prophecies. Well, when the beast kills the two witnesses in Jerusalem, the Jews will also see the abomination of desolation. In an instant, many will understand that the Antichrist just broke the Daniel 9:27 covenant, and that their politicians had sold them out and picked the wrong Messiah. They will see the writing on the wall and know that the Arab nations very quickly are going to be flooding into Jerusalem with the goal of destroying every Jew, because that's always been their goal. And that has always been through Satan's goal. So he's going to be using the Arabs. So many of the Jews who kind of get what's going on, they head for the wilderness, not even going into their houses to get any supplies for their journey. So Revelation 12 is depicting this group of Jews who flee Jerusalem and head to the wilderness. So today we pick up our study in Revelation chapter 12, verse 3, where it says, "Then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 diadems." Verse 4, "And his tail drew away a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, who is Israel, who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child." Okay, so the dragon, he reads the prophecies of Revelation 11 and 12. It was his team that killed the two witnesses in Jerusalem. He knows the mid-trib rapture of the great harvest of souls will occur when the witnesses are called up to heaven in Revelation 11, verse 12. Now, the entire Bible deals mainly with the nation of Israel, and that's why we are given more information about the Jews than Gentile nations. So just because a group is not mentioned, that does not mean they are not experiencing horrible things at the same time. Okay, continuing on in Revelation 12:4. Let's repeat this. "And his tail drew away a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth." At this point, the red dragon has made a voluntary, calculated military move. He takes part of his troops, a third of them, and posts, a third of the stars of heaven. So he takes part of his troops, and he takes a third of the stars of heaven, and he posts them down on earth. Now, stars are angels, are spirits. So he's got some wicked spirits up there in his army, in his arsenal. And now I'm thinking about this, and our team is talking about this, and the dragon may have assumed that his angels would be adequately equipped through the satellite equipment that's been placed in orbit. So he's reading the Bible prophecies, has been for thousands of years. He's thinking, I think I know how I can stop that mid-trib rapture. So he hooks up all this stuff, satellites in the orbit and Wi-Fi. So the dragon's troops get down there in the wilderness trying to stop that particular group from being raptured, but we need to assume that he's already got some ground troops, perhaps trying to stop the global rapture of the church. But it looks like the troops can't get themselves off the ground and back to heaven to pluck those saints as they are traveling up to heaven to be with God. The red dragon has miscalculated. Or maybe God has turned off his Wi-Fi service. Can you hear me now? Well, this means they can't traverse back and forth between heaven and earth anymore. So now the red dragon's troops are stuck on earth. The church is raptured mid-trib, and he can't stop them. Jesus says in John 10:28, "No one will snatch them out of my hand." Well, that word snatch is harpazo. The Strong's word 726 that we love that word. Well, Jesus says again in John 10:29, "No one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand." Okay, so we need to compare John 10 verse 28 and verse 29. First, Jesus says, "No one will snatch them out of my hand." Verse 29 is, "No one is able." And that word in the Greek means they don't have the power. They don't have the power. It's like they don't have the power source. It's like they don't have the internet, Wi-Fi. Again, I'm just speculating on that, but it says, "No one is able to snatch, harpazo them out of the Father's hand." That is because, if you will remember, at the pre-trib rapture, Jesus comes down in the cloud. He himself calls up the bride and they go up. Well, at the mid-trib rapture, it's very different when we read in Revelation 11:12. A voice comes out of heaven and says, "Come up here." There's no mention of anybody meeting the church in the cloud. So see, that rapture is a little bit different. And it says nobody can snatch them, the mid-trib rapture, out of the Father's hand. That's interesting. So now, according to the Dictionary of New Testament Theology, harpazo, our favorite word, 726 from Strong's Concordance, means, as most of you know, to snatch away, to seize, to forcibly carry off. So as God is rapturing the church at mid-trib, the red dragon's troops that are posted on the earth, they're trying to snatch them. They're trying to take them out of the Father's hand, trying to forcibly carry them off, but they're unable. Hallelujah. Okay, so Revelation 12:5, and I'm going to read this from the King James Version because I like it's more, in this verse, it's more accurate to the actual Greek words. So Revelation 12:5. "And she brought forth a man-child who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne." So this, shows us again that the red dragon's troops, ground troops, were not able to devour her child. The child was caught up. So that word for man is a strong male, but that word child is huios, and we learned about that Greek word when we made the video, the children of the bride chamber, because it's the same word for child as children. So these children, the children of the bride chamber, the church, is going to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her huios, child, was caught up to God and his throne. So not caught up to Jesus in the clouds, caught up to God and his throne. They go straight up to the throne. Wow. So the church, made up of the one new man, Jews and Gentiles, they become one. They are the man-child, the children of the bride chamber. Jesus taught us about the huios, this child, in Matthew 9:15, Mark 2:19, and Luke 5:34. Okay, now I want to talk to you about how they are going to rule all nations with a rod of iron. Many people have thought that Revelation 12:5 is referring to Jesus. But there's several clues that indicate it's not Jesus. It is indeed the children of the bride chamber. Here's the prophecies concerning the children of the bride chamber. Look at Revelation 2:26 through 29. Jesus says, "He who overcomes and he who keeps my deeds until the end, to whom I will give authority over, to him I will give authority over the nations, and he shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of the potter are broken to pieces, as I also have received authority from my Father. And I will give him the morning star. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches." So the church speaks of government, ecclesia. So you see, this is the church that is going to be ruling the nations with a rod of iron. Now you can see why Satan does not want the church to be raptured, because he's got his government, wicked government, up there in the heavenlies, and he knows the church is going to replace them. And that is exactly what happens. Now, I also want to show you that Jesus did not experience the harpazo of Revelation 12:5 when he ascended to the throne 2,000 years ago. When he ascended to our Father, he was not forcibly snatched away. He was completely in charge. He knew when he was going to ascend, and he knew what the conditions would be. Jesus has never needed to be saved from the wicked entities. Now, when he was a child and his father and mother, Mary and Joseph his stepfather, whisked him away to Egypt, so that passage had a partial fulfillment. Revelation 12:5 had a partial fulfillment of Jesus as an infant. Clearly, there were entities trying to kill him. It also received partial fulfillment every time a new believer comes on the scene. Every time somebody is saved, right away, as you know, you may have felt it, you may have experienced it, but the wicked entities are trying to devour you, trying to devour your faith. And indeed, the pre-trib rapture of the bride will experience Revelation 12:5 in part, but it has its full prophetic manifestation at the mid-trib rapture of the church. Now, to further, I'm going to get a little bit dogmatic here, because I see so many being, stumbling over Revelation 12:5 and thinking that's Jesus that is caught up and not recognizing that is the church. So I want to talk to you about a couple of Greek words that refer to Jesus when he ascended to the throne, and sometimes the phrase is used, he was taken up to the throne. So I want to just, if you will bear with me, I want to, for those who really need the extra scriptural backup, and I'm not slighting people for that, I think it's a good idea, ascended, that word is anabaino, and it means to rise up. The base of that word, ascended, is the word foot. So you can read about Christ's ascension in John 3:13, Acts 2:34, Ephesians 4:8, Ephesians 4:9. I'll read John 20:17 to you. Jesus said to her, "Stop fastening yourself to me. Stop clinging to me. For I have not ascended. I have not anabaino to the Father." So John knew the difference between the word ascended and harpazo, caught up in a rapture. Luke knew the difference between the word ascended and harpazo, caught up. Luke 2:34-35. For it was not David who ascended anabaino into heaven, but he said But he himself says, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. Do you see that little play on words? The word ascended means to rise up. The base of that word is foot. And here Luke is talking about Jesus ascending into heaven and his enemies being made a footstool for his feet. I just love that, things like that. Okay, Paul knows the difference between Christ's ascension and that he never needed to be harpazoed, raptured, saved from wicked entities. Paul wrote in Ephesians 4:10, he who descended is himself also he who ascended far above all the heavens. Okay, now in some verses, it is written that Jesus was taken up. Well, that word is similar to ascended. This word taken means, all right, it's Greek, bear with me, analambano. Analambano. It means to take up, to take in, to receive up. Nothing about being forcibly seized. It's just to receive up. Luke knows the difference between that word and harpazo, Acts 1:2. Speaking of his ascension, until the day when he was taken up to heaven, analambano, up to heaven, after he had, by the Holy Spirit, given orders to the apostles whom he has chosen. So you see, Luke would never have said that Revelation 12:5 was speaking of Jesus' ascension. Let's look at Acts 1:11. Men of Galilee, this Jesus who has been taken, analambano, who has been taken up from you into heaven, will come in just the same way as you have watched him go into heaven. Paul knew the difference between the word harpazo and analambano. He says in 1 Timothy 3:16, he who was revealed in the flesh was vindicated in the spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among the nations, believed on in the world, taken up in glory. So you see, Jesus is not the one being referred to in Revelation 12:5. It is the church that needs to be forcibly seized, brought up to safety, because the red dragon's troops are trying to harpazo, seize them out of Christ's hand and then mid-trib, the Father's hand. And we also need to remember, God promised Israel a rapture, and he will fulfill it, and it's fulfilled at mid-trib. Israel, kind of think of them as the bookends of the church. The church was started by Jews. So just as the church came in with glory, it's going to go out with glory. Okay, so moving on, Revelation chapter 12, verse 6. Then the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God, so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. So we know exactly how long. We know this is mid-trib language here. They're going to be provided for divinely until the end of the 7-year tribulation. So the women in the wilderness, Israel in the wilderness, and she's going to a place that God has prepared for her. She's missed, the mid-trib rapture. They're called the remnant. And incidentally, the bride is never called the remnant. I often hear people calling the bride the remnant. Nope, she's never the remnant. The bride is the first fruits of the Spirit, Romans 8:23. Okay, so the remnant after that mid-trib rapture, which people will view that, Revelation 11:12, it very clearly reveals that people will watch those who are raptured up. Well, that is going to be a signal to them. They will see that and they will dedicate themselves to God, and they will see Christ's second advent 1,260 days later, when Jesus' feet touch down on this earth for the second time. So at raptures, Christ's feet never touch this ground, never come back and touch this dirt. So they will see Jesus come back with his hosts. Romans 11:26 says, "And so all Israel will be saved, just as it is written, the deliverer will come from Mount Zion. He will remove ungodliness from Jacob." Okay, look at Revelation 12:7. Oh, this is exciting. "And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels waged war." Verse 8, "And they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven." Well, what changed? That the dragon and his angels were no longer strong enough. After 6,000 years of mankind's history and the wicked angels warring against God's righteous angels, why all of a sudden was the dragon and his angels unable to maintain their place in heaven, their place of government, oppression over all the nations? Well, the answer is obvious here. The church was raptured. A new government is going to occupy their seats. So just like the bride went up at pre-trib and became one with Christ, so too does the church go up at mid-trib and they become one with Christ. But they become the glorified government that occupies the seats of the wicked angels, and the church now becomes the righteous government in the heavenlies that the Father wants. They'll have their glorified bodies on, eternal bodies, cannot be harmed. Verse 9, "And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him." Okay, so you see in Revelation 12:4, we learned at the beginning of our study, the dragon took his tail and drug a third of the star angels' spirits to earth. Well, in verse 9, the rest of his army was thrown down. Oh my goodness. So this passage proves that more than 1/3 of the angels followed Lucifer in his rebellion. Right, because look at it this way. In Revelation 12:4, when it says the dragon drug a third of his angels, sent them down to earth, but he left some up there. Verse 9, what he left up there is thrown down. So see, he actually had more than a third of the angels. It's very likely 2/3 of God's angels followed Lucifer in his rebellion. And it's likely, I can't say for sure, that in Revelation 12:4, when he says he drug a third of the angels, that was half of his army, and he left the other half up there. But the church goes up and throws down that other half. Okay, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found this interesting. It's fun to speculate on some of these things. Let me know if there's anything you're thinking or something that maybe I've missed, and we'll talk to you later. Bye!